Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 4, Episode 48. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Question posed, answer provided. The NFL just sucks. It simply sucks. And the games that we witnessed over the course of this Thanksgiving holiday, including now this Friday game that they're playing, demonstrate as much. Oh, and fuck the Dodgers. Thank you all to my loyal, my dear listeners. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. If you like what you hear, This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Give me money.
Act 1, question posed, answer provided. The NFL sucks.
A couple of weeks ago, I do a segment on this podcast posing the question as to whether or not the Arizona Cardinals might be good at football or the NFL just sucks. 2 weeks later, the answer to that question is clear. The NFL just sucks. The Arizona Cardinals go to Seattle. And look, Seattle's a hard place to play, period. I don't care what team you are. If it's in the fall, you might have a chance. If it's in the winter, you're screwed. It's cold. It's often rainy. The place is loud as hell. For all their ups and downs, that team has had a very solid defense for what you could say is the last 10 years, if not 15 years. But Kyler Murray looked bad. He did not have any of his rhythm that he had in the 4-game win streak. He made some very stupid plays, and he also reverted, is that the word I'm looking for? Reverted back to the Kyler Murray who wasn't sure whether or not he wanted to run the ball or throw the ball. And so when he had opportunities to throw the ball, he looked like he was unsure as to whether or not he should run. And in situations where he should have just turned and ran, he was sitting there looking down the field in between this kind of, I'm going to run the ball. No, I'm going to throw the ball. No, I am going to run the ball. Don't want to take anything away from Seattle. Don't want to take anything away from their home field advantage or their defense. But Murray didn't look good. And he didn't look good like he didn't look good at the beginning of this very season. The Minnesota Vikings allow the Chicago Bears to come back in a game where they're up, I think, 17 points. There is a onside kick that's actually recovered by Chicago. Chicago kicks a field goal to tie the game at the end of the game. They go into overtime. Chicago gets the ball. They win the coin toss in overtime and proceed to lose 30 yards over 3 plays. It's 1st and 10, and then it's like 4th and 30-something. Caleb Williams takes a incredibly stupid sack. Just, I don't know what to say. Hard to believe that the guy who led the team back from that kind of deficit would turn around and do something so stupid, but I guess that's the reason why they get into these deficits in the first place. The Minnesota Vikings, of course, then take the ball down the field, kick a field goal, win the game. Fast forward to Thanksgiving, and you've got the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. In the first game of the day, the Lions come out, kick the shit out of the Bears in the first half. They score a touchdown in the second half, but the Bears claw their way back and have an opportunity to tie the game with a minute left. With 1 minute left. With over 30 seconds left, they have the opportunity to run a play and call a timeout, and they really only need 4 or 5 yards to get into field goal range, at least a long field goal. It's Detroit. You're kicking inside. Kicking a long field goal is not out of the question. Instead, Chicago, with a timeout in hand, proceeds to burn through 30 seconds to run one play. And the game ends after that play is an incomplete pass. You had not only an unconscionable amount of time for the offense to come back to the line of scrimmage after they ran their last play, but then with roughly 12 seconds left, Caleb Williams, after the Bears actually get into their formation, they're lined up on the line of scrimmage, he starts trying to read the defense. He's trying to determine whether or not the play that they're in is the right play or who he's going to go to based on the defense that he sees on the other side of the line of scrimmage. It's, okay, right? Like, I'm not editing any of this out. This is just, you're baffled. You're sitting there as a sports fan, baffled. And it flows through every single person who's ever played EA Sports or Madden football. Everyone who's ever played that game had to have some level of time management, of clock management, in order to be successful, whether playing against the computer or playing against a live opponent. Matt Eberflus, the Chicago Bears coach, well, he was the Chicago Bears coach. Of course, he got fired after this debacle the day after. He is watching the clock wind down. He has a timeout. He has the authority to call the timeout once he sees that his quarterback up at the line of scrimmage is actually trying to read the defense and audible into a different play, and he doesn't do it. And he allows that play to be the last play of the game. The Chicago Bears lose in excruciating fashion. The next game is the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Giants. The New York Giants, who had a first-round quarterback that they just decided to release because they were going to bench him, and instead of starting their second quarterback, who I believe they're paying $4 or $5 million a year to, they decide to start their third-string quarterback at Dallas. How did that work out? It was a fucking disaster, of course. The Dolphins are at Green Bay, and again, the Dolphins have been up and down this entire season. It's hard to tell whether or not any of the wins that they've put together are a product of the fact that they are the Dolphins team that looked good over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, or if those are scheduled wins. If they are just playing teams that are worse than they are, or at least play worse than they do on any given Sunday. It's in Green Bay, it's cold, it's at night. You're talking about a Miami team that's not that good in the first place, they just get crushed. The worst one-loss team in the NFL, not only this season, probably in the last 10 years, if not in the history of the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs play at home against the Las Vegas Raiders on Friday and proceed to allow that team to run the ball all over them in the second half. And here the Raiders are, with seconds on the clock, driving down the field to tie the game. The quarterback, who is a guy named O'Connell, I'm not looking this up. These people aren't worthy of me looking them up and being like, oh, this is where that guy went to college and here are his stats. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? This motherfucker isn't going to be starting an NFL game in 2025. And if he is, it's just further testament to the fact that the NFL sucks. He goes up to the line of scrimmage in Kansas City. Seconds left on the clock. He's got 1 or 2 plays that he's going to be able to run to put them in a position to kick a field goal. And he starts doing what? He starts trying to read the defense, and he's going to audible out of a play that they have called into something else. Because they are on the road, the offensive line can't hear audibles. They can't even hear the snap count. It's so loud. So they have a system whereby the guard looks at the quarterback. If he sees the quarterback clap his hands, the guard taps the center. The center then snaps the ball. Oh, jackass is starting to try to move people around, and it looks like he claps his hands. The guard, thinking that he's clapping his hands to have the ball snapped, taps the center. The center then snaps the ball while he's not paying attention. He's looking around the line of scrimmage. He's looking at the alignment of his wide receivers versus the defensive backs. Center snaps the ball. It hits him in the chest. It's a fumble. Kansas City recovers. Game over. As bad as the coaching is in the NFL, and it's atrocious, this is the worst coaching that the NFL has had very likely in its history. And this is a product of the fact that there are no venerable NFL coaches anymore. They're trying to now break in a new breed of NFL coach. You're seeing the old guard go out, and that old guard being more disciplinarian. You've got coaches now that are much better at quote-unquote relating to younger players. But these younger players don't know what the fuck they're doing because you have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 players being paid close to 40 or 50% of the money that you have to spend in any given year. You're having a ton of turnover on your team because you're constantly trying to get younger and cheaper, particularly across your offensive and defensive lines. And if you don't have a coaching staff that knows what they're doing, and you've got a lot of young, inexperienced players, what are you going to need? You need an experienced quarterback, and there aren't any of those. Even the people that are coming in with a high pedigree are fucking idiots. Caleb Williams, the Chicago Bears quarterback, won the Heisman Trophy. He won the Heisman Trophy in college. He was the best quarterback in the nation while he was in college. Now, granted, he didn't win the Heisman Trophy his senior year, but he still had a great senior year, stats-wise, record-wise, of course, the team he played for, which is a choker team anyway, when coached by one Lincoln Riley, but that's for another segment. This is not a third-string quarterback that had to come off the bench because of injuries to the starters. This is not a situation where this guy was a 6th or 7th round draft pick and they're just taking a flyer on him. How he makes so many of the same mistakes that a 6th or 7th round draft pick who didn't play at a major college would make, particularly when it comes to clock management, is beyond me. Matt Eberflus was a terrible head coach. He deserved to be fired. There's absolutely no doubt about it. He didn't know anything about time management or clock management. He, as you may recall, in the game against Arizona, was having his first-round quarterback, who is a rookie, take 7 and 9 step drops in the fourth quarter when the team was getting blown out, allowing Arizona's defensive line to just maul his quarterback. Eberflus is the kind of coach that you have before you hire the coach that's going to lead your team to success. Eberflus is the rebound that you go out with, that you always question how you ended up with that person, but then you realize, oh, it's because I was in that relationship for 10 years and it fell apart and it was tragic and this is just what I needed at that time, even though it was awful. Well, given how poor he has coached the Chicago Bears team and how little he has done to develop a young quarterback, you absolutely had to let him go. Although he doesn't look it right now, Caleb Williams is the face of that franchise for at least the next 2 to 3 seasons, and you want the man to be upright and alive. Once again, the Kansas City Chiefs prove that you don't need to go out and win football games. Most of these teams in the NFL are so poorly coached that you just don't need to beat yourself. You can let them go out and lose the football game, which the Las Vegas Raiders have been more than obliging to do with not only the Kansas City Chiefs, but practically every other opponent they've played this season. The New York Giants releasing Daniel Jones and starting a third-string quarterback on the road against Dallas, a team that's not good themselves, but at least has the talent. I mean, which is ostensibly the same football team that it was last year, at least has talent. They're just waving the white flag saying, okay, we're done with this season. Let's tank and see what we can do with regard to a draft pick for a quarterback in the 2025 draft. There just aren't that many well-coached, high-performing, well-executing NFL teams in the year of our Lord 2024. The conclusion is stark, dear listener. The NFL just sucks.
Act 2. Fuck the Dodgers.
Yeah, what she said. I'll have what she's having. The New York Metropolitans they cobbled together a hodgepodge of pitching this past season, and it worked out as best as it possibly could. There were a number of pitchers on the New York Mets staff that had career years well into their careers, even though the Mets as a staff and many of the pitchers on that staff, that starting staff, had some of the highest walk totals they've ever had. I believe the Mets led the National League, if not the entire league, in walks. When you see a career year from a guy who's pitched in the league for 8 or 9 seasons or 12 seasons, you're not gambling on that person having another career year the next year. The Mets are obviously in the market for starting pitching, and here we have who? Blake Snell. He's a free agent. Well, that makes him an attractive target for the New York Metropolitans. Nope. Blake Snell signs with the Dodgers, a 5-year, $182 million deal. In the same week, the Dodgers signed Tommy Edman, who was the National League MVP, who beat up on Mets pitching throughout the course of that series. Well, what do? They're going to sign him to a contract extension after having traded for him in the middle of the season when he was supposed to go to the Chicago White Sox. The Dodgers jump in. They end up trading for him. He ends up signing a 5-year, $74 million contract extension with the Dodgers. The Dodgers, who have 3 most valuable players in their lineup in the last week have signed 2 players for a total of $250 million over the course of the next 5 years. In the immortal words of Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, this is no fair. By the way, I tried to look that quote up on the YouTube so that I could add it into this podcast segment, and it's not on YouTube. YouTube, get good. Get gooder. Why the hell is that quote not on YouTube? All right, so maybe the Dodgers do need a pitcher because Clayton Kershaw is 1,000,000 years old and they've had injuries to other members of their staff. But why is it now that every swinging dick in the league is now a prospect for the Los Angeles Dodgers somehow? It seemed like the only way the Dodgers don't fill a gap like a starting pitcher or a catcher or whoever it is, just throw out any position player out there. If there's not a free agent, a marquee free agent at that position, that's the only way that they're not filling any gaps that they have in their roster. It's an interesting predicament to be in as a Mets fan, as a baseball fan, but as a Mets fan in particular, where you've got an owner who's a billionaire and is like, I'll go out and spend money drunkenly like I'm a member of the Los Angeles Dodgers ownership group. But he can't because every swinging dick out there that's worth a damn ends up signing with the Dodgers anyway. Is there a solution? I'm sure there is, but I don't see that solution being voluntarily agreed to by the owners of this sport. I just don't see there being a salary cap imposed given the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I don't see the have-nots being able to convince the haves that they should give up what they have for the good of the sport. Perhaps what they need is now a new strata of tax imposition on teams that spend over a certain limit beyond the quote-unquote cap. So if they set the cap at, for any given team, a total of $184 million, that there be strata of taxes for the teams that exceed $194 million, $204 million, $254 million, $304 million, however you want to structure it, that there be tiers, and once you exceed the amount of money spent in that tier, the amount that you have to pay in a quote-unquote tax to go back to the league, to go back to the rest of the teams in the league, that increases. I'm sure there are smarter people out there who follow baseball more closely that have better ideas than that, but I just don't see any other way to impose a level of parity in this sport where the money is no longer the thing that's going to attract these players. The Boston Red Sox have that special out on Netflix where it goes over the 2 seasons leading up to that fateful series with the Yankees when they were down 3-0 and they end up winning that series, winning 4 straight games. And it talks about Alex Rodriguez going to the Texas Rangers from the Seattle Mariners. And really, that was a money move. They paid him the most money ever in Major League Baseball history. How does one say no to that type of offer, to that type of contract? Curiously now, you're not seeing these mid-level teams spend a significant part of their salary cap on 1 or 2 or 3 players anymore. It's these elite teams, and when I say elite, I don't mean elite because they're talented or they've got the best front office. They just have the most money. These are the teams that can absorb a bad contract or 2 or 3, whereas some of these other mid-level teams, because they don't generate as much money from ticket sales and from other types of revenue, namely the television rights to their local broadcasts, they've learned the lesson of the Alex Rodriguez. We can't spend 30 or 40% of our annual salary on 2 or 3 or 4 players. We have to distribute it more evenly, and we have to try to acquire as much talent as possible, either by way of the draft or these low-level free agents that we think that we can quote-unquote rehabilitate in our system. And then you have the Dodgers and the Yankees and now the Mets of the world, although the Mets haven't really demonstrated it because they're totally incompetent, although, fingers crossed, those days are over. You've got these teams that can go out and spend an inordinate amount of money on 2 or 3 or 4 player free agent contracts a year, and if that completely falls apart, oh well, back to the drawing board. We'll just start over again. And that loss of money, although of course it hurts, we've got an ownership group, or we've got an owner that's willing to absorb those costs. Better said, those losses. We live in a baseball world where every free agent wants to go to the Dodgers. They may want to also go to the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Mets. The money's going to be there. They're hopeful that the front office is going to put together a winner. But their first choice is always going to be, let's go to the Dodgers because we think we can win a World Series immediately there. I don't see this system that's created this monster changing anytime soon. Accordingly, fuck the Dodgers. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.